Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the WORX Plus TechTalk Podcast. Again, I'm your host, Brandon. Today we're going to be diving into another interview, but we're going to be doing it with Tim Van Der Veen, the product guru, aka the gloss father or the barbecue guy, if you know him by those names. So Tim is going to be sharing with us a bit of the innovation of machinery, how WORX Plus came to be through King Concepts, Husqvarna, ProGrind, and the history of how polished concrete has started with him. We're really looking forward to this one, so make sure you tune in and it's going to be a good one. Hello and welcome to another Tech Talk podcast episode. Today I'm going to be joined by the man himself, Tim Van Der Veen, where we are going to be building on the previous episode where I talked to Josh a bit about the history. So we're going to go through a bit more of the history again today with you, Tim. But I'm going to definitely pick your brain for all the product knowledge that you've got and all the innovation that you've got. And for those of you listening at home, Tim is also known as the Gloss Father, with probably more stories to follow. So yeah, we're going to build off of our last episode here, Tim. But I really want to start off with knowing where Josh told us that you guys started from with the wet polishing, terrazzo, and that sort of thing, and the machine development. Mm-hmm. Where exactly did you fit into the picture there when you were starting off with PGA?
Well, before we had ProGrind, we were actually a company called Creative Change, believe it or not. And great sounding name. I can't remember where it came from, but so essentially it's not a long story, but essentially my pre-work life history, I was studying at university, and apart from part-time jobs that everyone has, working cafes or paper rounds or whatever it happens to be. Probably my only construction experience prior to what I'm doing today was Dad was a ceramic tiler. So I just learned how to do ceramic tiling on weekends, as a kid going to site and handing him tiles or mixing grout or whatever and probably school holidays, that sort of stuff, earning a bit of pocket money, just going along as a labourer and learning how to tile till I never became a qualified ceramic tiler, but I sort of got exposed to every element of the trade pretty much. So that was my exposure to the construction industry. Prior to doing what we're doing today, I was actually studying at university. I was studying to become an osteopath. So I went straight out of year 12 to study osteopathy. It's a 5-year double degree. I got to about 2.5 years, about halfway through, and kind of decided sitting in a treatment room for the rest of my life, one person coming in and going out, and the next person, and just dealing with people's aches and pains in their bodies probably was a little bit, didn't have the adventure in it that I was probably hoping it would have, or that I would certainly need. So osteopathy was kind of my background from a study point of view. And look, there was elements of, I did physics and chemistry and so forth at straight sciences, mathematics, biology in year 12 and a bit at uni. So I've always kind of had a bit of a bent for information and facts and science and I guess rational and objective way of looking at things. But that was my background basically to getting before coming into this industry. So once I left osteopathy, what do? You've basically come to this fork in the road where the career pathway you thought you'd be following, you've basically decided that's not going to be. To me, I just went to what I knew, and Dad was working in a different business in a different industry at the time, and it was like, hey, why don't we start up a business? And we went back into the ceramic tiling industry. Dad was doing a little bit of stone restoration at the time, so marble and granite floors just here locally in Melbourne, just doing the odd stone restoration. Can't remember how he got into that, but he had a small little machine, single head machine, a bit slow, a bit like a Canterbury, but a very slow Canterbury sand or those sorts of things. We call a swing machine or progress machine. And so a little bit of exposure to stone restoration, but we essentially went back into the ceramic tiling industry and just started taking on projects from a ceramic tiling point of view. So our company was called Creative Change back then, and that's what we did. We ended up landing a job refurbishing the Regent Hotel in Melbourne. It was about a 20-floor, I think, refurbishment where it was just they were refurbishing every floor. We went in and pulled off all the bathrooms had marble tiles in them. They were relocating, the toilet roll holders and redoing all the bench tops, all that kind of stuff. So we're doing a bit of tiling, sort of repair, remediation work there. But we were also in charge of restoring all the floors, the marble floors in that hotel. So that was our sort of only real exposure to the flooring, and any form of grinding and polishing was actually in marble in the Regent Hotel. So essentially, coming from a finishing trade, I guess that's probably the important background. When you come from a finishing trade, you're putting the finishing touches. So it's aesthetic, it's detail oriented. You're always one of the last trades in the process. So what you're doing is actually being seen. So whether it be the tiling, whether it be the repolishing of floors, etc. That essentially led to, so my dad's Dutch, obviously with a name like Van Der Veen, kind of narrows down our country of origin a little bit. Dad's Dutch from Holland, so we're first generation Australians. Dad ended up taking a trip back to Holland just to catch up with family. His mum and brother and sister was over there. As he does, he just stepped into a ceramic tiling shop just to see what sort of tools are available in the Netherlands and what sort of products they're using. Are the building trends any different? He's always had an interest in that kind of stuff. And he came across a brochure for a small planetary grinder from a company called DK Holdings, which was an English company. And like I said, we'd been doing a bit of stone restoration with a kind of a single head floor polisher. Dad brought back this brochure of this. It was called a Tornado. It was 500 millimeters wide, what we call a passive planetary machine these days.
Yep.
And he brought it back and basically said, "Look what I found in the shop, the tile shop over in the Netherlands." So we looked at this brochure. Obviously, there was no internet back then, so the brochure was pretty much the only thing we had to go by.
Yep.
And said, "Hey, this looks a whole lot better than the little it's called an Ilfisk machine that we were using. A whole lot better than that." And we could see some opportunity to scale or improve our productivity in this. We were thinking strictly stone restoration at the time.
Sorry, what year was this, Tim?
Oh, this is, so I left university in 95, so it would have been around middle of the year. Yeah. So that's when it was. Josh and Chris's memory is far better from a timing point of view than mine is. You'll probably pick that up from the previous interview with Josh, but it was in 95. So Dad came across this. It would have been late 95 probably that he came across this Tornado. So that turned into us actually placing an order for one of these machines. So we pretty much maybe there was a couple of telephones in there across to the UK, but based pretty much on a brochure that we got from a tile shop in the Netherlands. We placed an order for one of these Tornado grinders.
The power of good marketing.
Yep. So that was really our first step into a proper grinding and polishing machine. Again, pretty much with the focus on stone restoration. At the same time, look, Dad's always been a pretty creative thinker and lateral thinker, and we thought we had this machine that was going to give us really good productivity. The natural progression for us was to look at the terrazzo industry. So I think Dad had been doing a little bit of terrazzo restoration as well, and it was like, okay, let's go after some of the terrazzo. We knew that terrazzo was being done with very old Italian machines, just single head carborundum or stone abrasives for polishing, completely wet, and basically the way it had been done for hundreds of years. And we saw an opportunity, or I'd say Dad saw an opportunity to at least expand our opportunity for being able to, reach into other industries in the terrazzo. So essentially what happened is we got this machine delivered to Australia. At the same time, the company in the UK said, listen, you should come over to the UK to do some training. How about you come over for a couple of days? We'll show you how to use the machine, because obviously we're on the other side of the world. Terrible time zone difference for, technical support, all that kind of stuff. So said, yep, that sounds like a good idea. Let's go and see the big world of grinding a bit more and learn how to use this thing properly. And they said, look, just while you're at it, we're going to be at an exhibition in Verona in Italy. It was the Verona Stone Show. I still think to this day it's one of the biggest stone exhibitions in the world. And they said, how about you come to the show? We'll meet you there. After the show, we'll be back in the UK. Come for the training and sort of combine a couple of things in the one trip. Beautiful. So literally, I think the day the machine rocked up and we unboxed it, I was on an aeroplane to Verona, Italy, and then on my way to the UK for the training. So anyway, I left Australia, went to the stone show in Verona, and found my way to the show no one spoke English. It was very hard to find my way back then.
So you went by yourself, yeah?
Went by myself.
Yep.
Went and stayed in a youth hostel.
Oh, nice.
The back of Verona somewhere, this is how tight we were and how small our discretionary budgets for these sorts of things. I stayed in a youth hostel. And I still remember sleeping on this stretcher in a youth hostel, wondering, gee, I hope someone doesn't steal my video camera tonight. And I remember literally strapping everything to me, or at least my hand that was hanging off the side of this stretcher, so that if someone did try stealing something, at least I'd get a tug on my wrist or something like that. But knowing how deep I sleep, it was probably a futile sort of thought train. But anyway, went to the stone show, went and found the DK Holdings booth. Obviously, massive show, never ever seen anything like it. Well, I was pretty fresh into the whole industry, full stop, but never seen anything like this show. And amazingly enough, directly across the aisle from the DK Holdings booth was this Swedish company called HTC. And they had these black lineup of machines. And I literally remember getting to the show going, the hell is that? Here's the DK Holdings booth with one little 500 size floor grinder. Directly across the aisle, awkward, was HTC, which had the whole lineup. They had the 500, they had the 650, and they had the 800. And I was like, wow, this is different.
Mm.
So anyway, I spent some time talking with the guys in DK Holdings and just had this absolute itching to get across the aisle to talk to the guys from HTC. And back then it was still Håkan Tisell, who was the Swedish founder of that company, still manning the booth.
Oh, yeah.
So very early in the HTC story, I think they started in 1991 as a company. So I was there late 95, so 4 years after they began. And as it turned out, I probably spent more time on the HTC booth talking to the HTC guys than I did to the DK Holden guys who we just bought a machine from. Distinctly remember going back to the youth hostel that night, going to the payphone, finding somewhere, ringing Dad and said, hey, Dad, got some news for you. We bought the wrong machine. And Dad basically said, bullshit, basically. Don't believe you. And so that was kind of a bit of
an eye-opener?
A bit of an eye-opener and a bit of a, oh, shit type, But at the same time, great, because, we saw that there's probably been some better opportunities going forward. So I ended up going to the UK almost, I won't say begrudgingly, but it was kind of like feeling it was a bit of a futile effort because I'd already checked out. My head was already in the HTC camp. Like we'd bought the wrong machine, kind of like, all right, what's next? And kind of like seeing out the contract, spent the 2 days at DK Holdings, jumped back on the plane, came back home. And I think, that would have been around October. I think I was at the Stone Show in 95, somewhere around there, October, November. We ended up ordering an HTC 800 and it literally rocked up on our last day of work in December. We were working in the Melbourne airport doing some terrazzo in the internationals arrivals around all the carousels. And we managed to run that machine for 1 day prior to the end of the building season here before shut down for Christmas in Melbourne. And
did it only take you 1 day to really change your mind on the original machine?
Well, I still remember it took us half the day to get the right plug on the machine because it came with a European connectors and so forth, and obviously getting the right amount of power in for it and power lead, all that kind of stuff. So a lot of stuffing around. We probably only ran that machine for 10 minutes, I think it was. It wasn't very long at the end of the day, but already we could see an immediate impact on what this thing was doing to the floor. So unfortunately, the Tornado from DK Holdings just became our little finishing machine, essentially. So we ended up using the HTC, the 800, for doing all the first and second cut, all the the volume and the stock removal, and then running the smaller machine behind it, trying to keep up, just finishing. So that was how we got into planetary grinders, and particularly how we came across the HTC range of products. And really, for a number of years there, we didn't look back. Probably a year, probably a couple of years, year or two later, we actually had a visit from. Let me just rewind that. So we got into terrazzo big time. We brought a technology to the industry that no one had seen. We were absolutely running circles, running rings around the guys that were still using the old Italian single head stone grinder machines. We were delivering flatter floors. We were doing it in faster times.
How many people were in the crew then?
We probably had in the very early days, we had about probably 4 of us, and 3 of us, Dad, myself. Yeah, probably 3 or 4 of us initially, and then we grew slowly from that point. So we really found our foothold in the terrazzo industry. We started working for all the 3 main terrazzo companies in the country. We ended up bringing in a few more HTC machines, and we were running pretty much all up and down the eastern seaboard, doing all the shopping centres, all the new shopping malls, all the public areas. It was all wet grinding, so there was no dry processes back then. It was all wet, it was all slurry, so we were moving mountains of slurry every day. And we were just a bunch of kids, basically, with some new technology, and we were changing the industry, how it was done. And all the main terrazzo companies saw the way that we were working. We were doing 16-hour days probably back then. And we were just traveling on the road, couple of vans, couple of grinders, few guys, and just grinding out the meters day in, day out. Shopping centres have got fairly tight time frames, and so we really revolutionised how quickly the floors could get done, how flat they were being done, and the quality to which they were being done as well.
Yeah, I remember a story you told me a little while ago now of when you'd have yourself and Josh driving the vans, and you'd literally drive until you were basically falling asleep, and you'd switch drivers, and you'd wake up and yeah.
Yeah, you have to remember that I'm Josh's younger brother, and No, Josh is my younger brother, and he's 6 years younger than I am. So, look, Josh, I'm just trying to remember. Josh was the first of the family that came to the business on a full-time basis. Ben took a gap year when he finished year 12, and so he was the first brother that came and did any grinding with us, and that was just for that gap year when he finished year 12. Then he went into the IT industry. Josh came. He's probably have to get the timeline from him, but Josh came, and of course Josh was I was around 21, 22 years old, so Josh was sort of 16, and he was on his L plates. So we used to travel around the country in 2 vans with 4 of us, and it was actually 3 of us, and we'd often get a local labourer to help with all the slurry. So 2 vans, 2 machines, and a few guys, and of course, Josh and I had to drive together because I was the only one old enough to supervise a learner driver. Yes, and we used to drive a long way. I think the furthest job we did one in Perth, but we predominantly worked up and down the East Coast. We did a big job up in Cairns, and we used to literally just drive non-stop to get to these jobs. Not because of time pressure, but we just didn't see there was any value in time was money for us. We wanted to roll the machines out in the job and start grinding. And the more time we spent driving to the job, the less time we had to actually make money. So we were pretty hungry, we were pretty motivated, and we were pretty young and energetic. We were kids essentially. And we were just taking on these big contracts. So I do remember one night I would drive as long as I could, being the more experienced driver. And I'd essentially drive. We got very good at knowing our limits in those days. I wouldn't necessarily condone this to anyone listening right now, but I would drive till essentially I couldn't drive anymore. I knew if I go any further, I'm going to fall asleep. So I'd pull over, put the learner's plates up. Josh hops in the front seat. We may have had our front seats slightly modified so they could be folded all the way back into a bed-type reclining position. Toyota Hiaces were our vehicle of choice back then, and
shout out Toyota.
Yeah. And yes, we would. I would proceed to fall asleep next to the driver that I was actually supervising, and there were a couple of times where I would wake up in absolute bolt upright fright, shock, terror, and thinking I'd fallen asleep at the wheel. And of course, I'd just come out of a deep sleep. I'm looking out the front window. There's just headlights on a dark road. My brain is trying to compute what's going on. I'm literally feeling around for the steering wheel and the gear stick, pumping the brakes, thinking, this is not good. I've fallen asleep driving the car. And anyway, then I look across and there's Josh sitting in the driver's seat, just grinning away, looking at me, having a good old laugh. And so very, very fun, interesting, good memories, which I wouldn't encourage anyone else to do. But as I said, we were kids and we had a lot of growing up to do still.
Oh.
But many hours on the road, yes, around the clock.
Oh, that's awesome, Tim. Well, we don't condone that kind of driving here at WORX Plus. But so, Tim, brought in a few HTCs. Were you happy with those machines and with what you were doing?
The answer is we were very happy at the time with those machines. And really the caveat or the reason we were happy with those machines, one is we were convinced we had the leading technology in the world, that there was no one else in the country using it. So we kind of felt like we had a bit of we knew we had a market advantage. Two, everything, remember I said we were doing was wet. Okay. And I guess what I mean by that is wet dust is very different to dry dust as far as its impact on a machine. Even though slurry is wet and you kind of think of rust and all that kind of stuff, the biggest problem you have with these machines is the dry grinding process, and dust is such a hostile, it's a really hostile environment that these machines are operating in. I mean, it can float up anywhere. It gets so fine. It gets through seals. It sucks oil or grease out of bearings. It's shocking stuff. But once it's actually locked up with a water molecule, it becomes very heavy, and it actually drops down to the ground. Okay, so the wet environment or a slurry environment is such a different type of environment. It has such a different effect on a machine and its reliability. So back then, because we were doing everything wet, absolutely the machines were great. And as far as the existing benchmarks were concerned, that being the old Italian terrazzo grinders or the little the little DK Holdings Tornado, it was streets in front of everything else. So absolutely, we were very happy with them at the time. A couple of years after we started bringing machines in, Husqvarna actually came and visited us in Australia. And I said, I think we had 3 or 4 machines probably 4 machines by that stage. I think it was 3 800s and a 650. He decided to come over and visit us in Australia. And, over a barbecue one day, I think at my parents' house, he said, you guys really should look at the concrete industry. And we go, what do you mean? He goes, grinding concrete for floor preparation. Okay. He wasn't talking about polished concrete. That actually didn't exist back then. He said, you guys are traveling all over the country. We were doing 5,000 square meters here, 3,000 square meters there, maybe a 10,000 square meter job there. He said, if you get into the floor preparation, so, preparation of epoxy coatings or grinding the glue off a supermarket floor when they did the uplift of the vinyl tiles, that sort of thing. He said, you got thousands, tens of thousands of square meters literally down the road. Why are you traveling all over the country, subjecting yourself to all these miles on the road and these dangerous driving techniques when you can literally go out on a daily basis to a factory or to a supermarket or to a refurb, whatever, and grind concrete. And that sounded really good. Certainly sounded really good to me because I was fairly newly married and I was spending a lot of time away from my wife on the road working on building sites. And so we went out and started exploring the opportunity to get into the floor preparation industry. Floor preparation at the time was pretty much all dominated by shot blasting. Shot blasting was the number one game in town. Bit of scarifying and a bit of grinding with a creep mower type. It's just a single head 250mm petrol powered or electric powered grinding machine. So very little grinding being done, and shot blasting was the number one game in town. So we tried to start getting into the concrete industry because of Husqvarna had said this is the way it's all being done in Europe now, and it's a massive industry.
Using your existing machinery as well?
Using the existing machinery, but now not doing a wet process, a dry process, because it all had to be done dry. So we ended up bringing a vacuum in, or a couple of vacuums in, from Amator, which is another Swedish company, which ended up becoming Pullman, which is now got bought out by Husqvarna. So we brought I think the first couple of Amator vacuums into Australia. And we actually started trying to go out and find some floor preparation work, but we kept the terrazzo ticking over. But we actually started developing a dry system for terrazzo because we thought, okay, well, if they're grinding concrete dry, we should be able to grind terrazzo dry. It's a bit different material, but we saw the advantage of, because we were just filling literally skip bins of slurry every day. And you needed a full-time labourer. You'd have 2 guys grinding machines wet, and you'd have 1 person full-time just squeegeeing up slurry and scooping it up into skip bins. So the whole dry thing really appealed to us. So we started trying to develop a dry diamond tool system for dry process for terrazzo. like we'd just been encouraged to do for concrete. We got a lot of resistance in the concrete industry back those days in the floor preparation. And the number one reason is because if anyone knows anything about shot blasting, the difference between shot blasting and grinding is shot blasting is basically these little lead pellets being projected at high speed directly at a floor. And you have very little regulation as to how deep the profile of the shot blaster makes on the floor. If it hits a soft patch, that'll obviously blast out more than a hard patch.
Yep.
And you cannot possibly just keep changing the impact or the velocity or the force behind the shot that dynamically to get a beautiful finish all the way across. They're great on really, really hard concrete. They don't make much of an impact. But when you're doing, you're removing old epoxy coatings or glues and so forth, you have to run them slower. You've got to be more focused on how the duration of how long you're subjecting the floor to the shot. Long story short is you end up butchering the floor to some degree. And the industry kind of loved that because they got to repair it with leveling compounds before putting their new their floor covering over or their epoxy coating. So there's more money in the process because you're basically destroying the concrete to an extent. Then you got to make it good, and then you can finally put your coating or your floor covering back on top of that. So there's a lot of resistance in the industry, whether it be from the suppliers of the leveling compounds, or whether it be the flooring installers who are on the leveling compound installation gravy train, right? We got all sorts of pushback. None of the leveling compound companies would guarantee their product to stick to a ground surface. They all want it on a shot blasted surface because shot blaster had a better mechanical profile for bonding and adhesion. Grinding, smears all this dust into the pores of the concrete, and that affects the adhesion of the epoxy or the glue, and they wouldn't give any warranty for their adhesives or their so there was a ton of pushback. We thought this is fantastic because from an efficiency, from a cost of finished flooring, it's a win-win. But we little did we know how much money was in the actual, putting 4 to 6 mil of leveling compound down first, and then put the vinyl tiles over top of that, or the epoxy coating and so forth. We had a few epoxy companies that loved it because it made their epoxy coatings look really good. And the main reason for that was, one, we didn't have the same sort of impact on the floor, but two, with the shot blaster, every time it overlaps, it gets a double blast. You have to overlap it. You can't have it, perfectly one straight row up against abutting the next one. You always have a little bit of an overlap, maybe sort of an inch to 40 mil. So that would give a double blast, and that would leave these stripes in the floors, which are commonly called cornrows in the US, or we used to call them tram tracks over here. And it was so easy to see an epoxy floor that had been prepared by shot blasting because you could see all these stripes through the floor, through the coating. So in we go with grinding, and we start leaving a much, much nicer, flatter profile. And some of the epoxy companies liked it because we actually made their finished product look better, even though they weren't putting as much epoxy down to sort of fill up all the damage that the shot blaster had done. So they weren't quite being able to charge us, their costs weren't as much. They weren't charging as much out anymore. We were getting the jobs, making their work look a lot better. So we started making some sort of inroads into the market in a couple of places, but we got a lot of pushback from floor preparation in general. That all changed when we essentially we found out we were selling at the wrong level. Essentially, we were trying to tell all the flooring installers and the old epoxy coaters and so forth. We figured out over time we're not the quickest. As you well and truly know from being around this place, we take a little bit of time to put two and two together sometimes. We figured out, okay, basically who has the most to gain from our technology? Well, it's the floor owner. Okay. So long story short, we ended up striking up a relationship. I think it was with Woolworths. We had a contact that had a contact in Woolworths, and basically we went to Woolworths and said, "Listen, we can cut this 6 millimeters of this leveling compound. You're putting over 3,000 square meters of floor every store." And then when you uptake your floor and refurbish it, that's all been taken away and then it's being put down again. That cost, which I think it was about $16 a square metre at the time. So that's, close to $5,000, $50,000 for a floor refurbishment in a Woolly store. We can cut that out. You don't need that. At very worst, you need a skim coat over the floor. You don't need these flood coats of levelers. They're paying the bill, and they said, that sounds great to us. That cuts the cost out of our refurbishment and our refits. Let's give it a try. Okay. And that was really our breakthrough into getting into the floor preparation and getting this equipment more accepted in the industry, because now the people that were actually paying for the floors, the ones that were actually, shelling out, stumping up with the cash, were going, actually, no, we want this process, because they knew it. It made their floors look better because the vinyl tiles show every ripple on everything through them. So the flatter and the smoother the floors, the better the vinyl floors look. But it was faster turnaround because they didn't have to do the leveling compound. So when you're talking about a refurbishment where they're moving sections of shells out, we were cutting, I think, 2 nights out of the process, a whole bunch of cost, and making them look better. So
what's not to love?
Lots of ticking a lot of boxes for them. Once it started getting specified, beautiful. Then we started getting a bit more impetus in the markets for the technology. Now, to come back to your original question, were we happy with the technology? Yes, we were. But I qualified that because I said we were predominantly using it for wet. Okay, we're still doing terrazzo work on the sidelines when we're trying to break into this floor preparation marketplace. We found it very quickly that the dry process was absolute nightmare for the machines. They were designed basically for wet work, for slurry. And as soon as you started using them in a dry environment, we were literally having to rebuild the machines every 2 months. We would not get more than 2 months. And we could hear all the bearings going, they were showing all the signs. We just knew when these things were coming around for rebuild. They just weren't built for concrete dust. So it's a classic case of a product that's really good for one application, see an opportunity in another industry or another application, but it's not quite fit for purpose. And that's what we found out once we started going into the floor preparation. These things just, unless you want to, pull them apart and change every bearing every 2 months and belts and so forth, which is what we were doing. If that's your idea of fit for purpose, that's fine. But for us, that was getting really frustrating that we were having to turn machines. We had literally machines, backup machines, So when one was coming in and rebuilt, there was another one, a brand new one that's rebuilt, ready to go out. Yep. And because we were doing refurbs, we were doing a lot of night work. Okay. Because there wasn't so much advantage on a new concrete floor because they weren't doing near as much work to them. There wasn't near as much damage to them in the, pulling up all the old floors. So we were doing a whole lot of work at night, doing refurbishments of supermarkets. And you can't afford for anything to go wrong at night because the store needs to be trading again the next day. So we started coming up against real reliability issues once we started becoming heavier and heavier invested in the floor prep marketplace and doing less and less in the terrazzo.
Okay, so what was your solution to that?
Well, interestingly, the solution went back over to Sweden, and it was our turn to pay them a visit. So again, I jumped on an aeroplane and I went to Sweden. Hadn't been there before. Been to DK Holdings in the UK. They're a distant memory by this stage, and the poor old Tornado. I can't. They just got parked in the corner of the shed, never to see the light of day again. I went to HTC. I spent a couple of days there, and basically had to sit down and said, "Listen, these are all the problems we're having with the machines." Okay, and you went through the list, and basically got told that we're not having any of those problems over here in Europe. And went out to the warehouse, and of course there's racks and racks and racks full of parts. And it was kind of like, yeah, these guys are committed to their existing product. I can't see any changes coming very quickly because they're going to have to use all those parts up to make new machines before they're ready to change them and build new ones.
Yeah.
Plus the attitude of, well, these things, we're not seeing that problem over here. I mean, that's just the line that every customer wants to hear, whether you're it's your car, whether it's your vacuum cleaner, whether it's your TV. We've never seen that problem before. It's like, well, we're seeing it every 2 months basically, and we've got 4 machines. So it's kind of like, came back from that trip a bit deflated, thinking, all right, these guys had the conversation. There was absolutely no interest in recognising that it was an issue, let alone a discussion about, well, how can we make it better? How can we change it? We've still got this fledgling company we're trying to get off the ground. Every 2 months, one of them's falling over and having to be completely rebuilt. So we started making changes to the machines. We started making modifications, trying to put different seals into the machines, different bearing housings and different bearing sizes. Remedial stuff, but the best that we could do to try and get better productivity out of them. Then we had other issues. We had frequency inverters dying on us. We had motors burning out on us. Just a whole lot of these things where you start going to yourself, well, these kind of things really aren't built for what we're using them for. They were great when we were doing terrazzo, just falling apart in concrete. Manufacturer's not interested in doing anything about it. What do we do now? Well, we're already doing all these modification works. Why don't we try and build something else, right? And that basically put us on the pathway of, let's take all the things that we've kind of learned and all these modifications, and let's have a go at building another machine. Plus, let's add to it the things that we actually think we want. So, for instance, whilst they were great for terrazzo, we felt that they were underpowered for the concrete, particularly when you start grinding glues, carpet glues, blackjack, vinyl, pressure sensitive, all this sticky, tacky stuff takes a lot more power. So it's like, okay, those machines came out with 7.5 kilowatts, which was massive at the time because the closest machine was a single phase machine, 2.5 kilowatts. So 3 times the power more, almost 4 times the power that we're used to, but we still felt they needed more. And look, we had a 650 and an 800. 650 had a 7.5 kilowatt as well, and that didn't make sense to us. We got 2 machines. One's a lot bigger than the other one, but they got the same size motor. And it was a little bit like you had the Tirana, right? The 5-litre Tirana, and you had the 5-litre Kingswood or whatever it was, Monaro, right? The power to rate ratio, everyone thought was great on the 650, but the 800 was kind of like, this kind of sucks a bit. So let's throw an 11 kilowatt motor on it. Let's change the bearings. Let's put better seals. Let's make it stronger. We had already obviously had to find replacement frequency inverters. So we had some experience there with another brand and, supported by a local company here, a local dealer here in Australia. So we had a few things that we'd already developed, and it was more just about, let's start packaging those things into a new machine. And bear in mind, as they say, necessity is the mother of all invention. The focus is always, we want something more viable and reliable for our own contracting business. We were never going, hey, there's an opportunity for us to, build a new machine here and start selling it, let alone to people in other states of Australia, let alone the rest of the world. So it was born out of our own need. It was born out of our own frustrations. And it was born out of our observations and some of the solutions that we had come up with.
And where was all of these innovations being done, Tim?
The innovations began underneath my parents' balcony on a dirt floor, and it was an old fibro house up in the hills here in Melbourne. Tiny place, old fibro shack basically, and we had a front raised deck, and there was kind of a space underneath, like I said, damp, dingy dirt floor with some floorboards above us that leaked every time it rained, and that was essentially where we started. Actually, a lot of the rebuilding of the machines we would actually do on site, interstate, just on some crates and things like that. But yeah, a lot of our maintenance work started underneath my parents' veranda.
Talk about homegrown.
Yep. It was a massive day when we finally built a 60 square metre shed in their front yard, and we thought we were really progressing. We've now moved into a 60 square metre shed, and we could pull machines apart and service them and so forth. But we got to a point where our neighbours didn't like us blowing out all of our filters and so forth and sending plumes of dust through the neighbourhood. In which case we then had to start thinking about maybe moving to an industrial area, which was more appropriate for the sites of the sorts of activities that we were carrying out.
So Tim, 60 square metre shed, rebuilding machines, designing your own on a dirt floor. How did it get to King Concepts, and where was the jump from the 60 square metre shed to your own industrial sort of warehousing and growing it to what we all know as King Concepts?
Like I mentioned at the beginning, I think Josh and Chris's memory, particularly Chris, have got a very good memory for timelines, and mine just seems to be a bit blurry. But we moved out of that 60 square metre shed into, I think, around about a 500 square metre factory, which was just unbelievable. I still remember putting up our shelves and our racking and seeing how small amount of the area that we were actually occupying. And never in my wildest dream did we think we'd ever fill up that factory. What actually happened is we basically we started making this machine. We made our first prototype. Somehow the word got out, and we got, I think we made, at some point we decided, okay, there's something here that we can actually provide we can sell other contractors. Now, when we started bringing the HTC machines in, we had this mentality like, we've got this market edge, right? We were kind of agreed to be the distributors in inverted commas, because we never actually had any intention of selling any of these HTC machines, because we thought, we've got the advantage. We're going to control it. We're not letting anyone else have it, and we're just going to take over the marketplace, right? So that was kind of our starting position from a technology and how accessible we think it should be for the industry. It was like, no, let's hang on to this and keep it for ourselves. At some point, we obviously determined we didn't want to keep those machines anymore because they were becoming more problem than they were worth, and we started developing our own machine. Somehow we went. There would have been a time where we determined that, okay, our machine basically was the first machine out every night, and it was the last one in. It was the first pick, the first cab off the rank, and then the HTCs went after that. After about 12 months of this thing not breaking down at all, we kind of thought, could be onto something here, right? We were doing was concrete, surface preparation. We were doing hardly any terrazzo. Well, the terrazzo we were doing with the machine, it was all dry. So it was all it was being exposed to was dust. Okay, so 12 months when we're used to rebuilding the HTC every two months, we're going, all right, kind of onto something here. This is we seem to have made an improvement, right? And when I say we seem to have made an improvement, none of us have got any engineering credentials or qualifications. Certainly not back then, anyway. And so it was like it was all trial and error learning, and but we ended up with something that seemed to be going pretty good. We started getting people inquiring about them because they were seeing us out on site with a machine that, where does this thing come from? And they were seeing its productivity. We started getting inquiries from a company in New Zealand, a flooring wholesale, they were called, flooring wholesale. And the reputation of the machine just started to eke out slowly, and that there was this new product being developed in Melbourne that was obviously performing pretty well. We went to a trade show in Sydney, Design Build, I think it was called, or Interbuild or something back then. We put a machine on display, which was only half built. It was missing a lot of parts on the inside because we just literally couldn't get them to fit together the night before that we were trying to finish this thing off. So it was all looks, no functionality, and we sold 2 machines off that show. One to a company in New South Wales, Dynamic Flooring, Brett Lambert, and another company in Queensland called Green Rhino. So we'd made 5 machines and we sold 2 of them, and we got some interest from New Zealand, and they came over and said, look, we're looking at buying an HTC. We've heard about yours, tell us, show us Jason. Jason Torbett was one of them from Mega, from Polish Concrete Limited, who is now a close partner of ours in New Zealand. Was one of the first guys to come over from New Zealand to look at our machinery with flooring wholesale. And, we started thinking, okay, there's probably another business here of actually supplying the marketplace. And it was very much market-driven or customer-driven, people basically saying, look, how do we get one of these things?
We want what you've got, yeah.
Yeah, we want what you've got. And we kind of understood that because by that stage, like I said, the things were going out. 12 months without breaking down, we knew that they were going to be good in other people's hands as well. And that's pretty much how it started to develop from a let's build machines for other people, and because we knew we had a good product.
Oh, that's awesome. So King Concepts, how many years would that have been around for and been developing vacuums as well?
Yeah, we did. So we lodged one of the key things to our machines, and we haven't really talked about this. But we talked about a passive planetary machine, which is basically the whole development of the whole key to this industry has really been let's call it the control of the big head, or the drum, as some people call it, the big satellite head. So the passive planetary machines, which were the first ones or the first iterations, were discs turn on the ground and they basically naturally propel the big head around. The HTC was a breakthrough machine, not only just because they were making these big 800s, when the closest you could ever, the next biggest machine was a 500 from anyone else. So they'll bring out these sort of giant commercial machines, but they had created this unique top belt system, which was the first iteration of controlling the big grinding head, okay, not letting it spin around as much as it wanted to. And so we could see that pretty clearly, given our first machine was a passive planetary. And next ones were an HTC with this top belt, which was slowing down the big head, which converts more friction to the grinding heads and therefore more productivity. So the curiosity then goes, okay, well, how do we control this big head on our machine, right? Because HTC had a patent on this belt system. Long story short, we came up with the dual drive technology, where we ended up putting a second motor in to have complete control with regards to speed and direction of this big planetary head. So we lodged a patent in 1999 for the dual drive technology for that independent control. And that was really as far as we were concerned, the next big step in the technology in the marketplace. What was your question again?
Dust extractors.
Oh, dust extractors and so forth. Oh, so 1999, we lodged the patent. So I would say King concepts really started around sort of 99, 2000 when we actually set up. We had that creative change company that I think then became that company I think became King Concepts. ProGrind was a separate business. We set up a separate company. Creative change, I think Chris will be able to clarify this. He has a great memory for this. I think creative change became King Concepts, and then we set up a special company, King Concepts, to start supplying the marketplace. Of course, we had to get into the vacuum market. Well, I say of course. We got into the vacuum market as well because there was nothing really around to do with industrial vacuums of that size in the Australian marketplace. So we made a machine that was inspired, I'm going to say, by the first Armator. In fact, even if you look at the first Armator vacuum and you look at the 5500, the DC50 or the FM 5500 as we called it, but it became the DC 5500 in Husqvarna. The silo is very reminiscent of the first Armator, but then we changed a whole lot of other stuff. So when it came to the vacuums, we were kind of making a better mousetrap. When it came to the grinding machines, we made a big improvement, but we made a real innovation in the dual drive. So that was kind of not just a better mousetrap, but that was actually taking the industry forward. What we considered was quite a big leap forward with regards to that control over the big head. So King Concepts, call it 1999, 2000. And we spent the next 7 years essentially building machines, refining them, and selling them New Zealand, all over Australia. And we started actually getting, probably from around 2005, late 2004, 2005, really started to get some traction in the US marketplace. And of course, that continued up to 2007 when we did the deal with the acquisition deal with Husqvarna to become part of the Husqvarna group.
Oh, awesome. Well, yeah, let's dive into the Husqvarna side of things because based on our interview with Joshy, he was sent over to the States and did a lot over there with Husky. But whereabouts did you end up when you were acquired by Husqvarna?
I ended up working in Gothenburg, or Göteborg, as they like to call it over there in Sweden, at Construction Products headquarters. So Husqvarna basically has the two, well, not sure how it works these days, but back then there was two divisions, the equipment and the diamond tools. The diamond tools headquarters was in Belgium, and the equipment headquarters were in Gothenburg on the west coast of Sweden.
So what was your primary role there?
My primary role my title was actually Global Product Manager. So Husqvarna had very little experience in the concrete grinding and polishing industry. We actually didn't talk about how the polishing industry
we can get back to
developed,
that,
but we'll get back to that because we're just talking about floor preparation before. The polishing industry is another evolution in itself. But so I'm working in the headquarters in Gothenburg, essentially heading up the very small team of grinding and polishing experts. Had an R&D team, one engineering team as well. My main role was really to help integrate the product range into their worldwide footprint. So getting all the products into their range, all the proper manuals, all that kind of stuff, overseeing support, literature and information, service training, and the European sales training or training of the European sales team.
Yep.
My other responsibility was we actually ended up moving the manufacturing eventually from the Bayswater here in Melbourne factory into their China-based assembly plant in the south of China. So that was a big project to essentially transfer the manufacturing. I didn't do it exclusively, but I worked with their engineers and their manufacturing team in China, basically to get them to an ability where they could reproduce the product that we were manufacturing in Australia, basically to the same standards as what we were making in Australia, but in China. So spent a lot of time, probably 7 or 8 trips to the factory there, I think, from memory, helping with that relocation of the manufacturing, overseeing the quality and the outcome of the finished product, obviously in a different factory in a different part of the world. So
your Mandarin must be pretty good then.
I like the taste of mandarins.
So how many years ballpark would that have been that you were in that role for Husqvarna?
I worked for them for 3 years, essentially, a bit over 3 years, 2007 to 2010. And it was pretty full 3 years with those projects. I was like I said, I was the head of product, basically. So my responsibility was to not just maintain the status quo with the existing product we had, but also looking for new opportunities and working with their diamond tool division to see if we can bring out new diamond tools. But a lot of the time, and this would be the same with Josh and Chris, who are working for Husqvarna in different regions, was just dissemination of the information, bringing a machine and an industry and a technology that pretty much none of the company had any familiarity or understanding with, and trying to build that knowledge and competency within their business.
All right, Tim. Well, let's run it back to polished concrete. Let's dive specifically into some of the key developments that you came across, because Josh mentioned that you guys worked a lot with Mentone Premix to get a lot of control into the whole process and being able to know exactly what's going down on the floor to be able to produce the best product. But really want to get from you is what your developments were, going from the grind and seal, prep grinding, to producing polished concrete.
Yeah, so Josh probably would have told you that we were doing all this prep grinding, and obviously when you're grinding stuff off the floor, you end up revealing something underneath, and there would be times people go, "Oh, that looks pretty nice. Can we just put like some sort of lacquer over that or some sort of varnish?" And of course, we started putting, or doing all this grind and seal, which is what we called polished concrete back then. Grind and seal floors, because people just thought, hey, how about we leave it like that and put a clear coating on it? That became polished concrete. Remember, we started as a terrazzo company. So our background was in polishing natural stone and polishing terrazzo. So we're a finishing trade originally. And as much as we were making really good inroads into the industrial flooring and floor preparation in supermarkets and commercial and retail environments, I guess our heart was always in the finished product. We weren't responsible for a finished product when we were doing a lot of the concrete, except for the grind and seal stuff. When we're doing epoxy floors, when we're doing prep for vinyl and carpet and so forth, essentially our product was being covered over, right? You couldn't see we had been there unless you really could tell the floors being ground as opposed to shot blasted or something like that. So we've always had an affinity for the finished product and being, that the aesthetic element, whether it be the polished stone or the terrazzo. So coatings had a lot of problems, a lot of drawbacks with them, and look, there was starting to be this movement around the world, in particularly the United States, of actually starting to polish the concrete mechanically, as opposed to the grind and seal type thing. So we really started to draw back to our early days of being a finishing trade, of actually the polishing of the stone and the terrazzo, and started to apply that to concrete. There was this whole sort of evolution of starting to work with densifiers. We had already done a lot of diamond tool development locally, because one, it was just too hard to get diamond tools from the other side of the world. Two, they weren't working very well in a dry environment. Three, our machine was that much more powerful and heavy and creating a completely different grinding action and stress on the diamond tools than what an HTC did. So a lot of their products didn't even work for us anymore. So we had to do a lot of development with direct with diamond tool manufacturers to come up with products that actually did the worked under our machines and delivered the productivity and the finished result in a dry capacity, but then trying to draw on our old polishing experience from the marble and terrazzo industry to apply that to a concrete. So I guess what we had, we always had a really good idea of what a finished standard or benchmark would be, and certainly the grind and seal wasn't lighting our fire as far as that was concerned. We saw some developments, like I said, internationally with actually mechanically polishing the concrete, and because we had done a lot of development with diamond tools, it wasn't a big challenge for us to start combining diamond tools with densifiers and sealers and so forth and grouting to actually build a finished product out of polished concrete that started giving us a finished look that we were used to from the old stone restoration and terrazzo grinding and polishing days. So that was, I guess, getting back to our first love in a sense. We really enjoyed that process, and because you're actually leaving something behind. We felt like we were leaving our mark on the floor. The finished product was a reflection, literally speaking sometimes, of our own skills and products and our own work. So there's a lot of job satisfaction in that type of work compared to doing the prep grinding.
Oh, well, what would you say throughout your whole experience with developing the polished concrete industry and that sort of thing is the biggest standout to you, Tim? Biggest turning point, standout, favorite little memory? What do you reckon?
Oh, look, there's so many of them. I mean, this industry is definitely a product of competition and innovation with some really creative people, and we're only a small player in the development of the industry in the step. We may have quite an input in how it's developed here in Australia, but globally, there's, particularly in the early days, there were some few really good key players that were helping change the industry. So seeing the evolution from where it was to where it is today it's been amazing. We were just lucky we got into the industry when we were kids, and we've been able to be part of the whole journey because we're still in it. Whereas a lot of our competitors, I mentioned Husqvarna Thistle from HTC. I mean, these guys are gone; they're retired because of the age that they were when they started in the industry. So we've had the benefit of being part of the whole story pretty much. It's pretty hard to go past your own first prototype and the excitement that comes with starting it up. And unfortunately, ours was a massive failure. I have to admit that. We literally trashed it in about 30 seconds, the main planetary drive system. So it was back to the drawing board as far as that was concerned. But I think once we finally got our first prototype sort of in its largely finished shape, and we still have that machine, and essentially the machines up till only a few years ago were still pretty much all built exactly the same as that, in many regards. That was a pretty exciting time, starting that up and realising, hey, this thing's actually feels pretty good. You could feel a completely different grinding action. We could see completely different productivity. Like I mentioned, over the months, and we saw a completely different level of reliability and serviceability For a bunch of kids that have got no engineering background or qualifications, that was a pretty exciting thing to do and realise that, hey, we built this and this is ours. It's a great feeling when it's your own product. Again, it's we didn't invent it out of nothing. We're building on the back of other people's ideas and from understanding the way other people have built things and their train of thoughts, and bringing our own unique bents and perspectives and experience to things. But I think I can still remember where I was when we finally had the first real sort of finished prototype and starting it up on the floor and just being pretty blown away with how it felt and how it ran. And yeah, just that realization, well, hey, wow, this is ours. This is something really different.
That's awesome. Yeah. So Tim, you've shared with us quite a bit of a journey that you and the family have been on, and development and everything. How do you feel that the machine development has been the last few years?
I think the machine development has it's been a little bit like smartphones in a sense. There were some big breakthroughs or big quantum leaps in the early days, and there's a lot of small iterations. On every new model that's brought out, it still looks pretty much the same, and there's just tweaks and I think the machinery industry. I mean, I never would have guessed that our machine, which we basically designed in 1999, and I think was superseded by Husqvarna in around 2019, 2020. So 20-year life cycle for a product is pretty abnormal. I think HTC had 4 generations of machines that they built in that time. So we were either just really dumb and slow and ignorant to change, or we had actually built something that stood the test of time. And I think it's probably more the latter. And we still have customers that are running essentially our product that was designed 25 years ago. It's still keeping up with what would widely regarded to be as the industry benchmarks. So it's pretty hard when you've had a product like that that's remained relevant for such a long period of time to make big steps forward. We've seen some really good improvements or developments within, let's call it user assistance, all the radio control side of stuff, taking the I guess the physical load out of the application, and just making it easier. I think the radio control has been a fantastic evolution of the machine. It completely different way of grinding to the early days, where so much of it came back through tactile feel and sort of that physical connection with your machine, which you no longer have. Certainly, we know there's been a lot of driving of improvements in standards in dust extraction and dust control, and that continues to be a really significant part of our industry. But look, again, there's no one silver bullet in this industry, and we've sort of said this the whole time. The polished concrete process is really a marriage between equipment, diamond tooling, and chemicals. And you tweak one of them and you make a small improvement. You tweak all 3 of them, you make a much bigger step forward. So we're always focusing on, the full suite, because our industry is at the end of the day, it's a productivity-oriented industry. That's always been our focus anyway. We've always been shooting for productivity, and it keeps the product relevant. It keeps the product competitive. It keeps it profitable, and we just have this sort of restlessness that we want to be able to do it better. We want to do it faster. We want to do it easier. And the better we get at that, the better it is, and the easier it is to scale the product. It's easier to train people. It's easier to get people competent and qualified quickly. So we're always chipping away at all the edges all the time. And I guess given the longevity of our experience, we've seen a lot of stuff that hasn't worked. And that's helped shape us be able to focus on the areas that we know we just get better at finding things that do work quicker because we've made enough mistakes or we've been down enough rabbit holes that lead us nowhere to enable us to make better products that contribute to that evolution of the total package faster. From an equipment point of view, I think it's still going to be long term in the operator assistance side of things. One of the big things we haven't seen change very much in our industry, in 25 years, is any form of training or skilling of contractors outside of initiatives by the manufacturers and the suppliers doing their seminars like we do and others do. There's still no trade pathway, at least not in Australia, for becoming a concrete polisher. So as far as being able to scale and we're still a niche industry. You can go and find a plasterer or a painter or a bricklayer or whatever that's trade qualified. There's nothing in our industry. So we've got to make it easier. We've got to make it easier for people to learn and pick up. We need to be able to get it done faster, and we need to be able to leverage off experienced labour. Obviously, that was one of the big ideas behind the big Kevs, the dual head grinders that we made for ProGrind back in the around 2010, 2013 sort of thing, was just to be able to leverage and multiply the skill of a skilled operator by being able to control two machines instead of just one. So we certainly see that that's the future, is to make it easier, to make it less operator dependent, and certainly faster and more efficient process, so we continue to stay competitive with other options, whether it be epoxy floorings or the resilient floors, those sorts of things. So polished concrete continues to be sort of front and centre as a really viable option in the industry.
Yeah. Well, I'm really looking forward to diving in further with you on different types of innovation that will continue to grow in terms of diamond tooling, chemicals and sealers and so forth. But I think we'll save that one for another episode. But I think you've summed it up quite well, Tim, of what our goals are here at WORX Plus. It's just to keep growing the industry and helping the contractors. And yeah, if we all grow together, we'll lift the bar. So I think on that, we'll might sign off. But yeah, thanks heaps for joining us here, Tim. I'm sure we'll see you here many more times. And thanks to everyone for tuning in. Really appreciate it. And yeah, we'll see you in the next one.
Thanks, Brandon. It's been fun.
Absolutely.
This show is proudly supported by WORX Plus. WORX Plus brings total solutions to all concrete grinding and polishing contractors to make it totally work for their daily operations. We hope you've enjoyed this show. Make sure to tune in each week where we're going to dive deep into all things related to concrete grinding and polishing. We're here to help you so that you can boost your outcomes on the floor.